Welcome to this podcast for Wicked and Diary Method community on using diary method in international development research. I'm Emily F. Henderson. I'm the facilitator of this discussion. I'm a reader in the Department of Education Studies at Warwick. Our three contributors to the podcast today are Nidhi Sabharwal, Ahmad Akkad and Penny Plowman. Their details are all on the screen here. They will introduce themselves shortly. We hope you enjoy the podcast. Welcome, Ahmad, Penny and Nidhi. Can I invite you all just to briefly introduce yourselves to start off the podcast? So starting with Ahmad, then Penny, then Nidhi. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everyone. My name is Ahmad Akkad, and I'm a doctoral researcher and research assistant here in the Education Department at the University of Warwick. Thank you, Emily, for having me, and it's a great pleasure to be here today.
Hello, everyone. My name is Penny Plowman, and I'm an external research associate at the School of International Development, the University of East Anglia. And I teach on social and gender and development courses. And I also run a short course in gender and organisational change. And I work as a consultant, and a lot of my work is direct work to NGOs looking at organisational culture and change.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nidhi Sabharwal, and I'm a faculty member at the Center for Policy Research in Higher Education. It's at the National Institute of Educational Planning and Administration in New Delhi, India. My research area lies in the area of access and equity in higher education, and it's really nice to be here amongst all of you.
Thanks all and welcome. Now, we're going to be discussing various issues relating to diary method and international development research today. It's really important that we have empirical examples when we're talking about diary method, so that it's not just a theoretical methodological discussion. So we're really honoured to have three people here today who have actual empirical experience of using diary method in projects relating to international development. So we'll be drawing on these projects throughout the podcast, and therefore I'm just going to invite, in the same order, our contributors today to say a few words about the projects where they've used diary method, so that you have a sense of what they're talking about as we go on with the discussion. So Ahmad, please go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So basically, my doctoral project is a longitudinal study that revolves around the experiences of displaced academics and their potential role in post-conflict reconstruction. So I used the diary method in my study to explore the shifting displacement experiences of Syrian academics in their host countries, and how these experiences could shape their potential contribution and role in post-conflict reconstruction and recovery in Syria. And I think it was a useful method to use to capture ongoing events and changes in experiences and attitudes over time, and that could shape the potential contribution to post-conflict reconstruction.
Great. So my topic of research for my doctoral research was to examine how organisations are shaped by gender norms and what this means for equity inside organisations and in the work they do externally. So I'm interested in the link between the internal and the external. And to do this, I conducted an ethnographic organisational case study of an NGO in South Africa. And I used the diary methodology to reveal the gendered organisation, diverse experiences of power, hierarchies, change, organisational culture. So for me, the diary method was exciting and dynamic because it allowed me to get under the tip of the iceberg, if you think of an organisation using that metaphor. So it gave me a way in to explore the hidden and the silenced. Over to you, Nidhi.
Thank you. That's really interesting. So the diary method that we used, it was in the mixed method research study to study higher education experiences of students who are from the socially excluded groups in India. These groups include former untouchable in the caste hierarchy, they call the scheduled castes, other lower castes, which are other backward classes, and indigenous groups. So we wanted to understand their higher education experiences, and we used this method in a mixed method study, and the diary method in combination with all the other methods and instruments that we used helped us really in accessing spaces that we may have not been able to reach. The silenced voices of students from the socially excluded groups studying in higher education institutions in geographically dispersed locations across India. Thank you.
Thanks all. Three such divergent but fascinating studies. I think we can now get a little bit more into the detail of the diary projects that you did. Again, it's so important when thinking about introducing diary method to new researchers who might be thinking about using it, to actually think about what counts as a diary study, what actually is involved in diary studies, what are the kind of designs that are possible. I wonder if we could just, since Nidhi just introduced her project last, just follow on from the description of your project that you gave, Nidhi, and could you actually tell us a bit more about actually what was involved in your diary study? Thank you.
Yeah, so like I said, we included this study, this research instrument, the diary method, in the mixed method study, which combined reflections from the diary data with other data sources, student surveys, and focus group discussions to really understand the interactional nature of higher education experiences of students from the socially excluded groups, their experiences in the academic sphere and the social sphere on higher education campuses, and to study the existing institutional mechanisms to support student diversity in the higher education system in India. So we included solicited diaries largely to explore our research objectives, and one very important research objective was to uncover the nature and forms of academic and social challenges that were faced by students from the socially excluded groups in higher education institutions. Like I said, these institutions were geographically dispersed across India. So these diaries helped us also reach that geographic dispersion. So I'll just go into the detail of what we did. There were 50 diaries that were completed by second year students who were women, the scheduled castes, the former untouchables, the scheduled tribes, which are similar to the indigenous groups, with majority of the students being male, the students who completed these diaries, followed by female student groups across these social groups. Now, in addition, because one other important thing that we were trying to understand was the intersecting challenges that these students face, because they also belong to multiple disadvantaged groups. So in addition to being from the socially excluded groups, the participating students who completed these solicited diaries were also from low-income families, first-generation higher education learners from rural areas who had studied in regional language as medium of instruction. And all these 4 aspects, plus students from the former untouchable group, in addition to being members of more than one disadvantaged group, also encountered stigmatized identity, ethnic identity, which compounded the effects of these multiple barriers they face. So these 5 dimensions were in fact that we were able to, through the solicited diaries, were able to capture the 5 dimensions of these disadvantage. Through these diaries, we were able to get insights on the nature of higher education and the challenges students faced while experiencing their campus life. Over to you, Emily.
Thank you, Nidhi. Of course, you've let us know that you use diaries in amongst several different methods, and I believe that within Penny, within your ethnographic case study, you were also using diaries as just one of several different methods. Would you like to tell us a bit more about how you use diary within your study design?
Thank you. Yes. So I need to sort of take you to an NGO in South Africa with about, at the time that I was doing the research, about 65 people, and a mixture of, it was an organisation working to address violence and development issues in South Africa. And it was made up of researchers and psychologists and social workers, and a whole mix of, it was very interdisciplinary. And it was 70% female and majority Black in the context of South African society. And I approached this whole piece of research of trying to understand the gendered organisation using, as you say, Emily, a number of different research methods. So I think as a, obviously, well, I don't know, maybe some people do more than one PhD, but as this was my PhD and my learning curve for research, I seemed to get involved in quite a lot of things. So I did what would be expected, focus groups, qualitative interviews, I did a survey, I did a number of things. And then this idea of the diary method was popped into my head. And I used to keep a diary myself, still do. And so I was very attracted. It was like a sort of intuitive thing of thinking that this would be very interesting and perhaps a way to hear what's really happening for people and their experiences. So I used the diary method. It was known as the Diary Project in this organisation as a participatory research methodology. So my whole organisational case study was me in the organisation as an ethnographer, but then finding a way that I wanted people to participate. I was using a feminist research paradigm, shaping my methodology. So to hear those voices, which are often silenced, to hear people who feel excluded from the sort of mainstream culture, hierarchies and so on. So I really just liked the idea of the diary methodology and read a little bit about it, but then dived straight into it. So I think that was the way that I did my research regarding the diary method. Alongside this, I also had something called a photographic project as well, which I later learned was something called photo voice. So it's interesting how you sort of go into things and then you realise there's a whole kind of obviously sort of framework around it as to what you're doing. But so my diary study was a way to get the people in the organisation involved in a study of their own organisation. So for those of us in the podcast, everybody listening, it's like imagine being asked to have to dig deep and explain what's going on for yourself in your own organisation. It's a big thing to ask of people. So I immediately realised it was sensitive research, that I needed to build up trust and relationships. And I was in a position where I was very close up in all senses to the organisation. I was able to physically go there as often as I wanted to. And so I could hang out in that ethnographic fashion. I could sit on the sofa. This is pre-COVID days. I could be hanging out in the coffee area, whatever. So before I even introduced the diaries, I had already spent 3 months in the organisation. So they'd seen me around and I knew the organisation, but I'd only done one piece of work with them before as a consultant. So now I was also, after 20 years of practice, I was reimagining myself as a researcher. So there's a lot of things going on. So I had built up a relationship with people. And when I was thinking about the different steps around this sensitive research, there were sort of 5 areas. And so maybe I'll just highlight them here and then we can pick up as we hear from everybody in the podcast. So one was the step of setting up, and I've already alluded to the importance of trust, relationship, to see whether people will be really even interested in this, writing about themselves in their own organisation, their experiences. And the result of that first intervention was the need to address confidentiality and anonymity and develop a diary consent form. So I didn't know I was doing that at the beginning, but it came out of all the concerns. People were worried, are we going to name people? How are we going to write about what's going on in the organisation? Then there was the actual writing process. And so I developed prompt sentences, guidance. People were writing once a week for 6 weeks, up to 20 minutes a time. So some people did 20 minutes, some people did less. So it was a very mixed experience in terms of what I got back in these diaries, which were handwritten. Then there was the analysis. So step 3 was the analysis. I was the sole reader of the diaries. And then I think, as we've established through earlier conversations together, the one thing that the diary method generates is a lot of data. If it goes well, it can be a release. I'm interested, well, in both your kind of research projects where you're trying to get at, what people who are excluded, people who are, facing all kinds of different problems and very often not heard, how we can get them involved in research and sharing safely their stories. So the analysis was me as the sole reader, finding a way of getting all this information from the diaries. And I used something called an activity diagram. So I had these massive sheets of paper trying to understand what was going on and link to my categories of research. And from that, I developed themes. And then by this time in the process, because this was going on over about 3 months, the diary writers were like, come on, Penny, what's happening? We want to hear what others have been writing, because there was a lot of curiosity. So then I introduced this idea of a diary dialogue. So that brought people together. I was able to share the themes. And I remember that being a very well attended workshop because people wanted to hear what others had been writing about. And one of the most powerful things was about recognition and isolation, which I think we all have experiences of that, being in an organisation, being recognised more at a conference than in your own organisation, that kind of thing. So it was interesting what came up and very reassuring. And then the last part was doing these one-to-one diary interviews to find out whether I'd understood what people had written about correctly and give a chance for clarification and also to say thank you, because it was an enormous amount of effort that people put into it. And maybe just one thing to flag up is that my entry into this organisation was on an understanding that I would also give them a report, because they were, aside from for me and my thesis, because they were already very engaged in a whole number of different change policies. This was just after the official ending of apartheid. So they had a whole programme of transformation. They had a transformation team. So there were different things going on. So I always think of the diary method as being for data collection, but also has the potential to intervene. So with the different constituencies that you're both talking about, it has that possibility of change. It can feed into perhaps some of the more formal policies that organisations have. So yeah, I'll stop there, but that's sort of a brief overview of the 5 steps.
Thanks so much, Penny. I think that gives us a really good kind of framework around which to keep discussing these diaries. And actually, before coming on to Ahmad, I was wondering if I could pass back to Nidhi, because just thinking about some of the things that Penny shared in terms of the on the ground process, I'm thinking that maybe it might be useful to hear just a little bit more, Nidhi, about not just the value of the diary in your study and the findings that it led to, but actually on the ground, kind of what happened and what were the students asked to do. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, so there are 2 parts to this question in my mind. One is why did we use the diary for our study? Because it was a mixed method. So we used the diary, and there were multiple reasons that we included diaries in this study. One of the main reason was that so irrespective of the higher education institutions, we were studying these institutions across India, across states, geographically dispersed, and we found that during our pilot, irrespective of the institution being studied, many students from the socially excluded groups were afraid to reveal their identity and engage in group discussions. And while women were hesitant also to speak up in such open forums, and we realized this during a pilot, and diary method it just sprang up to us as a way to overcome this difficulty. So this reluctance was expressed when, of not engaging in open forums or even visibly being identified with the research group or the research theme. This reluctance was expressed when students were requested to take part in focus group discussions. There is the reluctance of students to be visibly engaging in group discussions led to a modification in the research design after a pilot to include diaries as a choice of research instrument in the study for the students. And it helped us in overcoming difficulties related to reaching out to respondents to participate in the research. So that was one very important reason. And another reason for using the diary method was that it offered flexibility to those students who were physically unable to participate in focus group discussions, which were being conducted after regular classes. So in the beginning of the podcast, I had mentioned 5 dimensions that we were of disadvantages that we had encountered, which through the diary method we were able to overcome those 5 disadvantages in terms of reaching out to students. So it offered flexibility to those students who were not there after the classes were over in the higher education on their campuses, because there were many students from the disadvantaged social groups and women who were leaving their campuses as soon as their classes were their classes were finishing. So diaries really provided them the flexibility to record their views at their own convenience. And the other aspect of flexibility was that students filled out their diaries in the language that they were most comfortable with. So the medium of instruction, that was the 5th, one of the important dimension that I had discussed in the beginning, the dimension of disadvantage. So we were able to overcome that dimension as well, because these students were dispersed across geographic regions. That also meant different regional languages. So it provided flexibility to the students to record their views in the language that they were most comfortable with. And importantly, the methodology of our research was being informed by a social justice research objective. We wanted to understand ways in which students' caste, class, ethnicity and gender influence higher education experiences on college campuses. So to develop a process-centric and deeper understanding on these 5 dimensions, we were through diaries and integration of these diary entries with other research instruments, findings from research instruments, I think we were able to reach closer to the truth.
Thank you, Nidhi. And just at the very mundane level, your diary study involved students receiving notebooks that they.
Yes, yes. Yes. Sorry, yeah. That was the second dimension of of the question. So so we gave notebooks and pasted open-ended semi-structured diary formats which asked open-ended answers to prompts which had, we wanted to allow reflections and recording of the context related information and provide introspective data. We wanted to get those entries. So the diarists were provided these open-ended prompts which they could follow to record their campus experiences. We wanted to triangulate findings from multiple data sources. The prompts in the diaries were related to the topics that was being discussed in the focus group discussions, but it was more of their everyday experience. We requested them to record their everyday experience in terms of their classroom interaction, in terms of their interactions with their peers, in terms of interaction with access to support services. So yes, but it really helped us triangulate all the data and also develop a comprehensive understanding on the research questions that we were trying to ask.
Thank you so much. I think that gives us a really good insight now into what your process involved. And I think we can now move on from these two studies, both of which were quite institutionally situated. And also, in the grand scheme of things, involved diaries over a relatively short amount of time. I think, Penny, you said 6 weeks. Nidhi, I think it was 2 weeks or so for your diaries. To discuss now Ahmad's study, which involved diaries over a longer period of time, and such an important part of international development research, thinking about displaced populations, and where diaries come in rather than thinking about institutions, thinking about displaced populations. So Ahmad, would you like to tell us a little bit more about your choices around diary method and what your study involved? Thank you.
Yeah, sure, Emily. So basically my study involved an diary interview design, and that lasted for 6 months. It's a bit longer than expected. The study comprised 20 displaced student academics who were residing in different countries in Europe and in the Middle East. And then I had a first round of interviews with the participants online using Skype or other applications. So the purpose of these interviews was to understand the participants' let's say, the impact of displacement on their lives and experiences, and their academic identities as well, and their belonging, and also to explore their perspectives on their post-conflict reconstruction in general and in Syria in specific. So I asked, after finishing the first round of interviews, I asked the participants to keep diaries, and these diaries were event-based and solicited in nature. This means they were provided with prompts and questions to record their experiences. And again, that was for 6 months. And the forms of these diaries were basically online because of the dispersion of the participants in different countries. So I used Word document and Google document as well. And that was also one of the preference of the participants to use. And the purpose of these diaries was actually to explore both the professional and the personal lived experiences of academics in exile, and what it means to be in exile as a displaced person on the first hand, and as an academic on the other hand. And these diaries were submitted on a monthly basis. So at the end of each month, they were reminded to submit their diaries. And diary recording included experiences about, for example, marginalization, whether intentional or unintentional, and in academia and in life in general in exile. And also it was about experiences of academic advancement, academic support, personal changes, family changes, personal development and growth, and so on. And also the diaries were about, they were important to shed light on experiences of how displaced academics could mobilize their expertise, skills and knowledge over time to their home country in Syria and to Syrians at large, whether inside Syria or abroad. After the completion of these diaries, after 6 months, I conducted a second round of interviews with the participants. And the purpose of these interviews was actually to seek further elaboration and clarification on specific points mentioned in the diaries. and to also to confirm my understanding of these points as well. And also another purpose was actually to explore the experience of keeping a diary in this project in particular. So that was just, a brief explanation about the design.
I think it's so interesting to think about diaries as helping us to unearth the hidden dynamics of institutions, and at the same time being so useful for tracking people's sort of micro level experiences when living across different countries. Ahmad, I think it would have been so difficult for you to conduct this study actually in the way that you did, using a different method. Would you agree with that? Sort of what were your decision-making processes around choosing diary method as opposed to other methods?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I spent really good time in planning why to choose the diary and how to use it with displaced academics. So first things first, I think the knowledge about displaced academics' lived experiences would be difficult to gain using cross-sectional data collection methods and tools, such as questionnaires or interviews, or single interviews to be accurate, which are normally conducted at one point in time. So it is hard really to explore a wide range of experiences from one single method that is conducted at one point in time. So by using such methods, I wouldn't really be able to gain lots of knowledge about their experiences, and usually participants would provide responses that are current and that are based on the time of conducting these methods. And experiences might be susceptible to change, and even attitudes. So I wanted something to help me gain longitudinal data, and the diary method was really suitable for this purpose. And another reason for taking the diary method in this project was actually based on my understanding that studying moving people or let's say mobile people would require a suitable mobile method that could capture their ongoing experiences and their let's say changing attitudes and circumstances. And I think the diary method was suitable for this purpose, and it was especially with academics who are busy people, and they could record the experiences at their convenient time in the chosen place as well, and it was moving with them. And many of the participants in the study, they were they were on the move, or moving from one country to another, or from one institution to another. So it would be difficult really to conduct lots of interviews, and especially if they don't have time for this. The diary was really suitable for this purpose. And also, because I'm researching displaced people, this means that there are some experiences that are sensitive to talk about. And there are some issues that are hard really to tell in an interview, for example, face-to-face. And I thought the diary method was really useful and vital for this purpose, as some people would prefer to disclose, let's say, such information on paper or let's say online, rather than speaking about these, face-to-face. And some experiences about traumatized moments in their lives, and because of the conflict and the impact of conflict on their current lives or future, let's say, lives as well. A final reason was actually the benefit of the diary method in capturing micro level, let's say, and even hidden experiences in the lives of displaced academics. And it was useful to explore their positionalities and capabilities in exile. And for instance, some displaced academics, they talked about how they navigated higher education systems in their host countries. So there were lots of details that are hard to tell if they are, not written or not remembered if they are, spoken about in an interview. So they talked about how they navigated these higher education systems, or let's say how they struggled to integrate into academia in exile. And they talked about experiences with minute details about who was involved and when it happened and how they felt about, such experiences. So I think the diary method functioned as a magnifying glass, let's say, through which I was able to understand wider contextual, influences and factors and structures that were surrounding displaced academics in exile.
Thank you so much, Ahmad. As I'm listening to all three of you talking, there's such a focus on picking up on this micro level detail. Why is it so important to you as researchers? And this is free for anybody to start off responding. Why focus on this micro level? Why do we need a method that helps us to capture this micro level and capture it over time in the way that diaries do? What's so great about that?
Well, I think maybe I can just kick off on this, that what was important in my study as a sole researcher was wanting to get perspectives from across the organisation. So in terms of hierarchy is formal and informal. So the diary, the people who were attracted to the project, if I think about, my kind of sampling for that, it's interesting to think how through that first workshop, when I gave an open invitation for people to come, I was lucky because it wasn't very scientific. I was just lucky that people from a cross section of the organisation came. And so it gave me, people who were used to writing, maybe it's the first time to do this self-reflection, but it took them into a place where they could really, because of the trust and the consent form, I guess, all the sort of guarantees, really spill the beans about what they were experiencing. And picking up from what Ahmed and Nidhi, you're saying, there's something about it being a safe space if it's properly kind of constructed and enabled, and that's quite difficult to get at, even through an interview, because people can perform, they can say what they think you want to hear, all that kind of stuff. But through the diaries, there's just something that happens that takes you into the micro. Now, in my context, I was talking about something which is very contested, gender, in a context where for many people in the organisation, already 70% female, why do we want to talk about gender? Why don't we talk about race? So the intersections of gender and race became a big thing that people would talk about. Also, the other thing is that actually talking about gender in organisations, I think for a lot of time we're not conscious of it because it's a norm, it's just the way things are. So it was working at lots of different levels, but I think it was using with a feminist kind of paradigm and looking at the methodology and ensuring that I was trying to get to hear everybody's voices. I think that's why it was important, rather than thinking of a focus group or bringing a group of men together or a group of women together, let's say. It opened up this sort of nuance and depth, which really then began to kind of shine a light on what I was getting from life history interviews or from other kind of, participant observation exercises. And I think that's what we're trying to do. The bigger context for me is the strategy of gender mainstreaming, which is something that institutions have signed up to across the globe. And it's a very big thing in international development. And it's been hijacked in lots of ways as a technical thing, removing from the politics of change and so on. So it's all kind of mixed up in a whole wealth of different ideas and thinking in international development. And having been a practitioner for 20 years before I started my PhD, I knew that some of those technical strategies were not really touching sides. And for change to happen, it has to be from the personal. So it's a tool that really gets to the personal reflections, and if well supported, people feel safe to then really kind of reflect their lived experience, which I think is what Nidhi and Ahmed are saying about. That's what we're trying to find in our research, to deepen it so that we can go beyond talking about women and men, for example. Yeah.
That's really useful. I don't know if Nidhi, you want to come in at all on the micro.
Yeah, so I think it's especially in the context of researching higher education experiences of students who belong to socially excluded groups, and they are, you know, this such form of inquiry requires using research methods that helps researchers to gain deeper understanding of the process-centric information related to teaching, learning in the classroom, or intersocial relationships outside classrooms. So, for example, in our study, we didn't use observation method, but we were able to get some insights into the experiences, everyday lived experiences of students, instances of exclusionary sort of behavior or act or feelings of instances of exclusion. So we were able to get some insight. So for example, in relation to patterns and differences in experiences, variations in experiences across student groups, quantitative analysis, so student surveys, quantitative analysis showed that students from the socially excluded groups were more likely to report that their teachers could not identify students by their names in the classrooms. The diary entries of the students from the excluded group reflected on the behavior of their teachers and its negative impact. For example, there was an entry in the diary, a male SC student, a student from the socially excluded group wrote, "Teachers keep addressing them as, 'Hey, suno, ha, kya hai tumhara naam? Hey, yes, you, what is your name? Listen," which was reported as heartbreaking and gave them a feeling of being not valued and respected. So for our study, through this method, we were able to really understand the emotions and feelings and attach meaning to the patterns that was emerging on higher education experiences from that quantitative survey data set. And we were able to come closer to gaining insights into challenges facing students from the socially excluded group. So the emotions and feelings was a very important aspect of our findings from the diary method.
Thanks, Nidhi. Such powerful findings from your study there. I kind of want to throw in maybe just one more question before we have a sort of final discussion around diary method in relation to international development research more broadly. And I guess this comes from the fact that in international development research, there have been such strong concerns around ethics, the ethics of the research process in recent decades, and all of you are talking about such potentially sensitive data, sensitive reflections, and the fact that in a way the diary leads to participants potentially sharing more than they would otherwise, more private, more traumatic, more hurtful, more powerful comments from the participants than they would perhaps given an interview, for example, or a focus group or a survey. And you've all highlighted that that's such a benefit of diary research, but I feel that also from that other side of the ethical challenges around this, I think we sort of perhaps recognise that there is no such thing as a safe space fully within research, and that there's maybe a danger in participants interpreting the diary as more of a private diary and forgetting that it's a research object as well, and that that there are perhaps concerns that that the findings might get back to the organisation, in Penny's example, for example. So I just wanted to throw out there to kind of not just seem to be selling diary method to international development researchers. What are some of the ethical challenges around this highly private and sensitive, in some cases traumatic data that's being shared? I wonder if Ahmad, I could throw that to you first.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think, the ethical side of conducting the diary methodology and method with the displaced populations wasn't an easy task really in the beginning. But I will first talk about how recruitment of participants ethically was an issue. You know, some participants, they weren't happy about getting involved in 6 months. And when I explained the purpose of this study, when I explained the valuable contribution that they would make to the study, and how the project would be reflected upon, hopefully, their experiences in the future, many of the participants were really encouraged and motivated to participate, and they started talking about lots of experiences they have been going through. So what I wanted to reflect here is that being clear from the very beginning and the purpose, and talking about the purpose of the research, would be really important to ethically recruit participants and to let them aware of their contribution and what is implied in their let's say participation. So I explained very well that these are the questions, these are the prompts, and you are not expected to talk about something you wouldn't prefer to talk about, and you absolutely have the right to withdraw. And there was a reassurance about the confidentiality and anonymity of their identity, especially some of the participants, like they had experiences that were largely political, and it was really important to make sure that all of the data are anonymized very well. So I made sure that it was clear for them that this is their participation and this is what is expected, and this is the nature of the data they would provide. So that this kind of understanding was great, and many participants, they were happy to participate, and I didn't have people who withdrew, which was great. And also, I think because we are researching displaced, I'm talking about myself, I'm researching displaced academics. I think the method, the diary method, was a powerful method for them to make their voice heard, and to actually to speak about their own realities rather than being spoken for, as happens, in the media and research reports, etc. And it's an epistemic tool actually to present their own experiences in their own words and their own way, and how they prefer their experiences to be shown to the world and heard. I think lots of international development research projects happen via NGOs, and this include the help of translators, research assistant, etc. And I think that this will impact the relationship between the researcher and the participant in some way. And using the diary method, I believe it was really useful for them to have more agency to talk about their own selves and how they prefer to be displayed to the world, rather than being spoken about and translated, let's say. So they had the option to use their own language, like in Nidhi's case, which was Arabic or English. So I made sure that all of the needs, hopefully, to be met for the participants, and that no ethical issues would be a concern from the beginning of the research until the end of it.
Thanks, Ahmad. I think you've rather turned my question back on me and showed me how diary research can be ethical, even amongst some ethical concerns. I'm going to prod a bit further to Penny and Nidhi and see if either of you are willing to open up on some unresolvable ethical challenges around diary method, possibly. Penny, I can see you've unmuted. Would you like to go next?
Thank you. No, it's very interesting, Ahmed, what you say and your experience of it. I think this is such an important question, and especially for people who are thinking about using the diaries for the first time, because we're saying it's sensitive and we're saying it's very powerful. Nidhi, you've spoken a lot about reaching people's emotions and feelings, and that was something that I remember when I collected all the diaries at the end of this 6 weeks. I was quite overwhelmed by the emotions coming out. So yeah, I remember that very powerfully. And I remember that in the beginning, when I was doing the briefing, I was obviously, this was a new methodology for me, so I was really sort of learning by doing. But I remember saying that this is a diary, like Ahmed, you're saying, being very clear that it's, you know, this is for a research project which is looking at the bigger picture of Penny's research, as well as being an intervention to help you become clearer about the kinds of things that you can do to change your organisational culture or support your transformation process. So I was always working on these two things, but sort of being clear, and as I said earlier on, that the questions that came up were about the insecurities around the methodology. So Emily, what you're picking up on, so the anonymity and the confidentiality. And so I, after that initial introduction, you know, had to, well, decided to develop this consent form, because obviously as a researcher, I wanted to be able to use the diaries to pull out quotes and so on. So that gave me an insight into some of the fears around it, because in this context, people are writing about themselves, each other, and I was so immersed in this organisation, even if names were crossed out, I kind of knew what was, you know, a lot of what was going on as much as I could. So that was really important to maintain that. But and how you can have a consent form, but how do you demonstrate it? I guess that's the big challenge. You know, you can have all the nice writing and the signing, but you know, how, because you want people to write, you want people to write. And one of the things I read very early on about the methodology is there's a very high attrition rate. So well done, Ahmed, for getting all yours to keep going. But I think that's something for all of us and for new researchers, that, you know, you have to give time to support people, to encourage them, because there's a lot of fear about whether you're writing, am I writing what Penny wants, you know, and all this kind of thing. And so one of the limitations that always stuck with me was that somebody might be reflecting on something very, very challenging. Well, often that's what people were writing about, an event that happened that was very challenging. And then somebody wrote in their diary, well, you know, this is all very well reflecting on it, but how is this going to help me? How am I going to be able to confront my boss, or how am I going to be able to sort out this problem with a colleague? And I remember this person, I mean, this is a good few years ago now, but I remember very clearly, sort of in brackets, saying, note to Penny, a limitation, because now all these emotions have come up, but what am I going to be able to do with them? So because it was in the context of this wider study, and even before I got entry to do this kind of research, we had to look at some of these things, but obviously things came up as we went through. And so this tapping into the emotions and thinking through how you're going to kind of, you know, facilitate that, because you don't want to not hear about that, but how you're going to support people through that process. So I guess it's, in a sense, I would say it's not a therapy diary. You know, you're not going to have a therapy interview at the end of it. But in some ways, it is like you are letting go of stuff. You know, once it's down on the page, you have got, you know, rid of something. So, yeah, I think those are some of the things. I don't know, because in your, you know, doctoral thesis, you always have to write the limitations, don't you, for your research methods. And I just think that they are limitations, but it doesn't mean not to do them, but it's more about how you manage that process so that people feel, I could see that somebody had ripped out a page. I could see that somebody had scratched out names. I could see somebody had given up with words. They just got crayons and drew something. So, yeah, so I think there are lots of things to kind of think about.
Thanks so much for peeling back some of the layers there, and I think this relates really nicely, Nidhi, if you'd just like to come in on, you know, some of the ethics of asking disenfranchised, vulnerable students to reflect on their powerful emotions. What's the sort of some of the ethical considerations around that?
Yeah, it was also quite. It was also about gaining trust to begin with the participants, and despite taking all the institutional clearances and also clearly stating before the data collection, before the start of the data collection, that the identity of the students would not be disclosed and their entries would be confidential. Yet students remained anxious about sharing their experiences through the diaries, as they were afraid of recording their personal experiences in writing. So on the one hand, they were afraid to be visible, but with the diary, they were afraid of giving their experiences in writing. Women students were quite anxious, faced a lot of anxiety, because this was really rooted in this cultural context where neither in college nor at home could they enjoy any privacy. So where would be that private space to write a diary, the entries, and then these diaries remain safe. And so the safe spaces that we are talking about is something that women, to find those safe spaces were a little hard. So that was a challenge that we faced. Yeah, that's the anxiety aspect, which both Penny and Ahmed had discussed.
Yeah, thank you to all of you for sort of opening up some of those challenges there. So just to round off this podcast then, I think given that we're sort of gesturing to an international development audience, so I'm sure others in other fields will be interested in your insights as well. But just thinking specifically around international development, which of course is, as you've demonstrated with your work, such a vast and multifaceted field anyway. I'm just wondering, why should people working in international development potentially consider diary method? At the same time, are there kind of particular challenges or modifications they might need to make to the method for the international development field? So just whatever reflections you have on this, perhaps I could just go around each of you. So perhaps Nidhi first.
Yeah, I think definitely there is a lot of scope for using diary methods in international research, and especially in studying higher education experiences, and especially in the context of expansion and massification of higher education systems across many countries in the global south. So, for example, in India, in the context of India, higher education in India was traditionally been in domain of the elite. So, however, this century has, 21st century has witnessed a dramatic transformation. Access to higher education has improved across all segments of population, and as an expanding system by definition is more inclusive than an elite system. But it is important that especially in the context of India, favorable public policies have been put in place to promote equity in access. And there has been improvement in access of students from the socially excluded groups. But what this also means is that the change in the nature of student composition, with campuses and classrooms becoming more diverse in terms of students' socioeconomic backgrounds. So how does one study this transformation, this dramatic transformation? I think that is diary method would be an important sort of instrument to include, perhaps in the mixed method design in order to study higher education experiences of students who are now coming more onto campuses.
Thank you, Nidhi, and I think that could actually apply across a lot of different kinds of public institutions as well. I'm thinking of healthcare organisations, for example. I think where policy has such a direct influence, and yet we don't always know how it's unfolding on the ground. Ahmad, do you have any reflections you'd like to share here as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, I think the diary method is really useful to reach when it's difficult to reach participants in difficult contexts, like conflict-affected countries or areas, and also where there is shortage of resources, where the internet, for example, is difficult to have, for example, in refugee camps. I think the diary might be useful in such context, and people have the flexibility to, in terms of time and place, to talk about themselves. And like I said earlier, it's a powerful method for participants to speak about their own realities rather than being spoken for. And I think they have more agency when they write about themselves and then interpret their own experiences on paper, for example, or using an audio diary, for instance. And regarding the considerations, I think considering other methods might be useful to use alongside the diary in order to have more knowledge about the specific phenomenon or a specific type of experience. So I think a post-diary interview might be useful, to check and confirm understanding of what has been recorded in submitted diaries by participants, and also to think ethically about the recruitment and the retention of participants, which might be difficult for some participants to participate in, let's say, lengthy periods of time in recording diaries. So therefore, I think a diary design needs to be really user-friendly and easy to follow with clear instructions, and that does not cause fatigue to the participants. So I think it needs to be suitable for a diversity of individuals as well. And people, researchers, I mean, can consider different forms of diary instead of the written one when possible. For example, an audio diary, a video diary, a photo diary, or a combination of all these if possible, in order to suit the needs and the wants of the applicants as well. And also the structure of the diary form itself. I think solicited event-based diaries might be better, in my view, than structured and daily diaries, especially with people who are busy or who cannot really talk about their own experiences on a daily basis. Use an electronic form rather than paper one when it is like expensive, for example, to buy a notebook or to ask participants to keep notebooks themselves and so on. So I think these are just basic considerations which might be useful for researchers in international development.
Thank you, Ahmed. A massive range of different things you brought in there. Thank you. I think that'll be hugely valuable. Penny, anything you'd like to add at this point? Thank you.
Thank you. So when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking about, sort of what has guided me and, the way that I, think about international development. And so for, many years now, it's been framed by this strategy of gender mainstreaming. And so NGOs, donors have gender policies and operational plans and so on, but we're still some steps forward, but lots of steps back. A lot of my work is in the area of addressing violence against women in the context of NGOs and support from donors and so on to address that. So, it brings me back to this, how do we get from those policies, strategies to action on the ground and change in organisations, which is really what brought me to even doing my diary study in the first place, was this link between the organisation internally and externally. So that's the big thing that I bang on about. And I think because I can see it's so important that what people think, feel and do inside shapes how they're going to implement and design and develop their policies in international development. It's not just something for women's studies. It's something that cuts across all intervention to eradicate poverty, to get another step towards equity, gender justice, and so on. Yeah, and the diaries play a part in that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, really, again, powerful comments, and I feel like you all made the case really strongly that diary method has a place in the international development methods toolbox. Just to round off this podcast then, can I ask each of you, if you have one really short, sharp piece of advice or recommendation if a new or researcher is considering using diary method in their international development research project for the first time, what is one thing that they should be considering? Penny, can I ask you first?
Why do you want to use the diary method?
Oh, question one should ask oneself. Excellent.
Yeah. What are you hoping to achieve?
Yeah, absolutely. Don't just use it. Think about it first. Ahmad.
I will echo Penny's question, asking about the purpose first, and also making people's life easy when they want to really participate in diary recording, and especially in regarding the design of the form, with having fewer prompts and having effective communication with participants as well.
Absolutely, don't ask too much from your participants. Definitely. Nidhi.
I think a really important aspect is doing the pilot first of the diary study, that the diary method. That's really important, I think, and both in terms of the implementation as well as in terms of analysis of the diary entries. I think that is one thing that I would really like to recommend. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to all of you. Right, well, this rounds off what has been a really fascinating discussion. Thank you so much to our contributors, Ahmad, Nidhi and Penny, for spending your time discussing with diary method with me today. If any listeners would like to learn more about diary method, we have the diary method community WordPress site, which you can search for, where we include other kind of resources and publications on this to deepen your knowledge. But I would just like to say thank you again so much to the three of you for sharing your time. Those of you listening as well, good luck with your diary method projects. Do keep in touch with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.